Troy kicked the edge of his bed, glaring at the stack of bills on his desk like they had personally insulted him. His roommate Sivan sat across the room, scrolling on his phone without a care in the world, shirtless as always. Troy tried not to stare. It was ridiculous how someone could look that good while doing absolutely nothing. I don't think the landlord takes vibes as payment, Sivan. Troy snapped, flopping onto his bed dramatically. Sivan looked up lazily, his messy hair falling over his forehead. Relax, Troy. We'll figure something out. We always do. Troy snorted. Yeah, because I'm always the one doing the figuring out while you post thirst traps on TikTok. Sivan smirked. You saw. Troy flushed, throwing a pillow at him. That's not the point. Sivan caught the pillow effortlessly, chuckling. All right, Einstein, what's your genius plan this time? Troy hesitated, then leaned forward. Okay, hear me out. There's this housing competition on campus. The grand prize is a year's worth of rent-free living. Sivan raised an eyebrow. And what does that have to do with us? The competition's for couples, Troy said, his voice dropping to a whisper. We fake it. There was silence, then Sivan blinked. Fake what? A relationship. Troy threw his hands up. We pretend to be a couple, win the competition, and boom, no more rent. Sivan laughed so hard he nearly fell off his chair. You want me to pretend to date you? Troy folded his arms. What's so funny about that? Nothing. Just first of all, I'm straight. And to fake date you. The guy who blushes when someone says anything intimate or sexual. Troy frowned. I do not. You're blushing right now. Troy threw another pillow at him. Are you in or not? Sivan tilted his head, considering. What's in it for me? You get to keep living here without having to sell your organs on the black market. Tempting. Sivan grinned and then stood up, walking over to Troy's bed. He leaned down, resting a hand on the wall behind Troy's head, effectively trapping him. But how do I know you'll be convincing enough? Couples are supposed to be intimate. Troy's heart skipped a beat. What are you doing? Sivan's smirk widened. Practicing. Isn't this how couples flirt? Troy shoved him away, his face burning. You're annoying. And you're adorable when you're flustered. Sivan teased, walking back to his chair. Fine, I'm in. Let's win this thing. As Sivan sat back down, Troy buried his face in his hands. This was going to be a disaster. The next week, on a Monday, Troy and Sivan arrived at the campus housing office where a long line of couples snaked out the door. Troy nervously adjusted his scarf, feeling like they stood out like a sore thumb. Sivan, on the other hand, looked completely relaxed with his hands shoved in his hoodie pockets. You could at least try to look like you want to be here, Troy muttered under his breath. I'm here, aren't I? Sivan replied, sounding bored. Besides, couples don't stress out like you're doing right now. You're going to blow our cover before we even sign up. Troy huffed. I'm not stressed, I'm just focused. When it was finally their turn, the housing coordinator, a sharp-looking woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, greeted them. Names? Troy Anderson and Sivan Hale. Troy answered quickly. The woman glanced at her clipboard. You two are a couple. Yes, Troy said, his voice a little too high-pitched. Sivan reached out, resting a hand on Troy's shoulder. We are, he said smoothly, his tone dripping with sincerity. I'm just here to make sure Troy gets the luxury housing he deserves. Anything for my babe. Troy froze. Babe? The woman's eyebrows lifted, but she didn't question it. All right, as part of the competition, there will be daily couple challenges. Your scores from these challenges will determine whether you proceed to the final round on Sunday. Are you prepared for today's challenge? Absolutely, Sivan said confidently, squeezing Troy's shoulder. Troy felt nervous. He was already regretting this. The first challenge took place on the campus field, where a student volunteer with a megaphone explained the rules. All right, lovebirds, the volunteer said, her voice echoing across the field. Today's challenge is all about trust. You'll take turns guiding your partner through an obstacle course blindfolded. The couple with the fastest time wins. Let's see how strong your connection really is. Troy shot Sivan a panicked look. Blindfolded. What if I fall? Or trip? Relax, babe, Sivan interrupted, grinning. I've got you. Troy rolled his eyes. Can you not call me that? Sorry. Would you prefer sweetheart or love? Troy is fine, he snapped. Sivan insisted on being blindfolded first, claiming it would give them an advantage. You just have to tell me where to go, he said. How hard can it be? As soon as the whistle blew, Troy realized how wrong he'd been to agree to this. Sivan, no, your left. Your other left, Troy shouted, watching helplessly as Sivan stumbled straight into a giant inflatable barrier. You said left, Sivan argued, trying to regain his balance. That was your left. Are you doing this on purpose? Maybe, Sivan teased, grinning despite being blindfolded. You're cute when you're angry, even when I can't see you. Troy felt his face heat up but refused to respond. Just keep going. They eventually finished the course, much to Troy's relief, though their time was far from impressive. Then it was Troy's turn to be blindfolded. All right, Troy, take a step forward, Sivan said, his voice unusually calm. Troy complied, holding his arms out nervously. Am I clear? Totally. Sivan lies. Troy yelped as his feet hit a low barrier, causing him to stumble a bit. Sivan. Oops, my bad. Sivan was clearly holding back laughter. You're doing this on purpose, Troy accused. Not at all. Sivan's voice was laced with amusement. Okay, now turn. Yeah, perfect. Just keep walking straight. Troy hesitated. Are you sure? Trust me. Troy did, as he was told, only to stumble into Sivan's hands as he caught him. The blindfold slipped slightly and Troy realized Sivan had been stretching his arms out this whole time to prevent him from falling. You're terrible at this, Troy muttered, trying to ignore the way Sivan's hands lingered on his waist. And yet, here you are in one piece. Sivan smirked. You're welcome. By the end of the day, they hadn't placed first, but they were still in the running. Troy couldn't shake the feeling that Sivan was enjoying this a little too much. What's tomorrow's challenge? Sivan asked as they walked back to their dorm. No idea, Troy replied, but I have a feeling it's only going to get worse. Sivan threw an arm around Troy's shoulders, pulling him close. Cheer up, babe. We've got this. Troy didn't even bother pushing him away this time. Back in their cramped dorm, Troy collapsed face first onto the couch, groaning into the cushions. This was a mistake. We're never going to win. Sivan kicked off his sneakers and flopped onto the armchair, looking far too pleased with himself. We didn't come last, Troy. That's a win in my book. Troy turned his head to glare at him. We'd have done better if you didn't keep running into things on purpose. I didn't run into things on purpose. Sivan grinned. I just thought it'd be funnier that way. Troy grabbed a throw pillow and launched it at him. This isn't funny. We need to take this seriously if we want to win. Sivan caught the pillow midair, tossing it back onto the couch. You're way too uptight. Loosen up, babe. Stop calling me that. Troy sat up, his face heating up for what felt like the 100th time that day. Sivan shrugged nonchalantly, inching closer. It's what couples do, isn't it? Pet names, maybe some cuddling. Don't you dare suggest cuddling, Troy warned, pointing a finger at him. Sivan smirked, leaning forward in his chair. Why, afraid you'd like it. Troy's mouth opened, but no words came out. He quickly turned away, pretending to fiddle with his phone to avoid Sivan's intense gaze. You're annoying. And yet you need me. Sivan stood up, stretching in a way that made his shirt lift slightly, revealing just a hint of his toned stomach. Troy's eyes flicked down before he could stop himself. I'm going to bed, Troy announced, scrambling off the couch and retreating to his room before he could embarrass himself further. Sweet dreams, babe, Sivan called after him, his voice dripping with amusement. By the time they arrived at the campus field for the second challenge on Tuesday, Troy was dreading whatever nightmare the organizers had cooked up. All right, couples. The same cheerful volunteer from the day before announced. Today's challenge is all about chemistry. We'll be testing how well you know your partner by having one of you answer a series of questions about the other. But here's the twist. If you get an answer wrong, you'll have to do a forfeit. And trust me, they're not easy. Troy felt his stomach drop. Forfeit? What kind of forfeit? Let's just say it'll get you out of your comfort zone. The volunteer replied with a wink. Now grab a clipboard and get ready. Sivan and Troy sat on a picnic blanket with their clipboard, surrounded by other couples. Each partner had to write their answers down separately and compare afterward. Troy was the one answering, and he had to write the correct answer to questions about Sivan. Troy's pen hovered over the first question. What's your partner's favorite color? Easy, Sivan said, scribbling something down confidently. Troy frowned. Is it blue or green? You've never actually told me. You're supposed to know this stuff, babe. Sivan teased. Troy rolled his eyes and wrote blue, moving on to the next question. What's your partner's biggest fear? Troy paused. You don't really seem scared of anything. Sivan leaned over, peeking at Troy's answer. You really think I'm fearless? I'm flattered. Stop looking at my answers. Troy is trying to cover the clipboard. Sivan just chuckled, leaning back. By the time they finished, Troy was sweating. When it came time to reveal their answers, he knew they were in trouble. For every wrong answer, the couple had to complete a task drawn from a box. Their first error came with the favorite color question. It's green, not blue, Sivan said, smirking. You're already losing, babe. Stop calling me that. Troy snapped, though his face turned pink. The volunteer handed them a slip of paper. Troy read it aloud, his voice trembling. Do a 30-second stare into each other's eyes. Sivan's grin widened. That's not so bad. Troy just glared at him. They sat across from each other as the volunteer counted down. At first Troy tried to focus on anything but Sivan's annoyingly handsome face, but then Sivan tilted his head slightly, his playful gaze softening into something else. "You're blushing," Sivan said quietly. "No, I'm not," Troy muttered, though his cheeks burned even hotter. "You are," Sivan teased, his voice dropping lower. "It's kind of cute." The timer buzzed, breaking the moment. Troy tore his gaze away, feeling like he couldn't breathe. Meanwhile, Sivan just looked too amused. By the end of the challenge, Troy was mortified. They'd had to do everything from feeding each other chocolate-covered strawberries to holding hands for 5 full minutes. And every time Sivan would chuckle at how flustered Troy would get. "That wasn't so bad," Sivan said as they walked back to their dorm. "I think we're starting to convince people." Troy shot him a glare. "You're enjoying this way too much." Sivan grinned, slipping an arm around Troy's shoulders. "Of course I am. You're fun to mess with." Troy shoved him away, but his heart was pounding. He didn't want to admit it, but part of him was starting to enjoy it, too. Troy barely said a word when they got home, but Sivan couldn't stop laughing about the day's events. "Come on, Troy, you should know my favorite color. I'm starting to feel neglected in this relationship," Sivan mocked, slumping on the couch. Troy stormed into his room, slamming the door behind him. "Good night, Sivan," he shouted through the door. Sivan chuckled. "Sweet dreams, babe." Troy groaned, burying himself under his blankets. His heart was still racing from the stare down earlier, and he hated how much Sivan's teasing stuck with him. This whole fake relationship idea was not supposed to be something that made him question every flutter in his chest. He forced his eyes close, trying to ignore the stupid butterflies. By the third day, Troy had braced himself for the worst. When Troy, Sivan and the other couples arrived at the field, the volunteer greeted them with her usual cheerful energy. "Good morning, couples. I hope you're ready to take things up a notch, because today's challenge is all about physical connection." Troy's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" The volunteer beamed. "Today's task is a couples yoga challenge. You'll be guided through a series of partner poses, and your goal is to hold each one for at least 15 seconds. Bonus points for style and creativity." Sivan leaned closer to Troy, whispering, "Did you hear that? Style and creativity. We're doomed." Troy elbowed him in the ribs. "Shut up. We can do this." The couples were split into pairs of mats. A professional yoga instructor with a microphone stood at the front, demonstrating the first pose, a simple back-to-back seated position. "Okay, this isn't so bad," Troy said as he and Sivan sat down and pressed their backs together. He could feel the warmth of Sivan's body through his shirt, and it felt surprisingly nice. "See, we've got this," Sivan said casually, leaning back a little too hard and nearly knocking Troy over. "Stop messing around," Troy hissed, pushing back to stabilize them. The instructor called out the next pose, the double boat. Both partners had to sit facing each other, feet pressed together, and hold hands while lifting their legs into the air. Troy groaned. "You've got to be kidding me." "Come on, babe," Sivan teased, grabbing Troy's hands. "Think of the free rent." "Stop calling me that," Troy snapped, but he let Sivan pull him into the pose anyway. It was awkward to say the least. Sivan's grip was firm and steady, but Troy could barely keep his balance. "Hold still," Sivan laughed. "You're going to take us both down." "I'm trying," Troy glaring at him. Somehow they managed to hold the pose for 15 seconds, even though Troy nearly collapsed when it was over. The next pose, however, was where things took a turn. "All right, lovebirds," the instructor announced, clapping her hands together. "Time for the flying angel. One partner will lie on their back while the other balances on their feet. Trust and core strength are key." Troy froze. "No, absolutely not." Sivan grinned. "Oh, come on. You can be my angel." "I'm not doing that," Troy protested, his cheeks already burning at the thought. Sivan raised an eyebrow. "Fine. I'll be the angel and you can lift me." Troy blinked. "Are you serious? You're twice my size." Sivan laughed, patting Troy on the shoulder. "Relax, I'll lift you. Just lie down." Reluctantly, Troy lay on the mat and Sivan positioned his feet against Troy's hips. "You better not drop me," Troy muttered. "Trust me, babe," Sivan said with a wink. "I've got you." Troy glared at him but didn't have time to argue before Sivan pushed upward, hoisting him into the air. For a brief moment, Troy felt weightless, and then the embarrassment hit. He was practically straddling Sivan's feet, their faces closer than he would have liked. "You're so tense," Sivan teased, his voice steady despite holding Troy's full weight. "Is this how you are with all your boyfriends?" Troy's face burned. "Shut up and focus." "Relax, you look cute up there," Sivan said. Troy couldn't even respond. His heart was racing and he couldn't tell if it was from the pose or the way Sivan's eyes met his with that stupid playful smirk. "Time's up," the instructor called, and Sivan carefully lowered Troy back to the ground. Troy scrambled to his feet, his face redder than ever. By the end of the challenge, they were thoroughly exhausted and somehow, they'd scored in the top 5. As they walked home, Sivan slung an arm around Troy's shoulders, pulling him close. "We make a good team," Sivan said. Troy sighed, his face still warm. "Yeah, sure. Just don't drop me next time." "Never. I've got you, babe," Sivan said, smirking. Troy didn't even bother correcting him this time. Troy barely made it through the front door before collapsing face first onto the couch. "I can't feel my legs," he mumbled into the cushions. Sivan, who seemed entirely too energetic for someone who'd just spent hours bending his body into weird shapes, walked past with a smug grin. "Yoga was kinda fun." "Fun?" Troy lifted his head to glare at him. "I was practically riding your feet while everyone watched." "That's not fun, that's humiliation." Sivan shrugged, heading into the kitchen to grab a bottle of water. "I don't know. You looked good up there. Majestic even." Troy groaned, grabbing a throw pillow and hurling it in Sivan's direction. "You're impossible." Sivan caught the pillow with one hand, tossing it onto the counter. "And yet you can't live without me, babe. Stop calling me that." Troy snapped, sitting up. Sivan strolled back into the living room, leaning casually against the wall as he took a long sip of water. His shirt had ridden up again, exposing just enough of his abs to make Troy shift uncomfortably. "I don't get why you're so worked up," Sivan said, tilting his head. "It's not like anyone thought it was weird. We're supposed to be a couple, remember?" "Yeah, but you're enjoying this a little too much," Troy muttered, crossing his arms. Sivan smirked, pushing off the wall and stepping closer. "And what if I am?" Troy's heart skipped. "What's that supposed to mean?" Sivan didn't answer. Instead, he took another step forward, causing Troy to sit up on the couch. He walked even closer until Troy found himself pressed against the couch, Sivan's body mere inches from his. "What are you doing?" Troy asked, his voice small. "Helping you get into character," Sivan said, his tone low and teasing. His hand came up and pressed against the couch beside Troy's head, caging him in. Troy's breath hitched as Sivan leaned in, his face so close that Troy could feel the warmth of his breath. "See," Sivan murmured, his voice soft but laced with amusement. "This is how couples act, all close and intimate." Troy swallowed hard, his brain scrambling to form a logical response. You're taking this too far," he stammered out. "Am I?" Sivan's free hand brushed Troy's arm lightly, almost absent-mindedly, but it sent a jolt through Troy's entire body. "Yes," Troy said, though his voice wasn't as confident as he wanted it. Sivan's gaze flicked to Troy's lips for the briefest moment and Troy's chest tightened. Was he imagining that? Surely he was. Sivan was straight. He was just teasing him like he always does. But then Sivan's smirk softened and his usual playful arrogance was replaced by something quieter, almost intense. "I don't think I'm taking it far enough," Sivan murmured, his voice barely audible. Troy's eyes widened, his pulse racing. What? But before he could say anything else, Sivan pulled back abruptly. His smirk was back, but it looked a little forced now. "Relax," Sivan said, stepping away. "I'm just messing with you. Don't get all worked up." Troy blinked, his heart still hammering in his chest. "You're an idiot," he managed to say, his voice weak. Sivan chuckled, grabbing his water bottle and heading toward his room. "Good night, babe." Troy stayed on the couch for a long moment, trying to stop his mind from racing. He hated how easily Sivan could mess with his head. Troy didn't think the challenges could get any worse, but the universe seemed determined to prove him wrong. When he and Sivan arrived at the field the next day, the air buzzed with anticipation. Couples milled about, some already looking flustered, others grinning with nervous excitement. The volunteer from earlier stood at the front, her smile a little too wide. "Good morning, couples. I hope you're ready for today's challenge because it's going to be a real test of trust and connection." Troy groaned inwardly. That could only mean one thing: physical closeness. "Today's challenge is called the Ultimate Couples Dance," she announced, spreading her arms like she'd just revealed the secret to life. "Each pair will perform a slow dance routine, but there's a catch. One of you will be blindfolded, and the other will lead." Troy froze. Blindfolded? Sivan's grin spread across his face. "Oh, this is going to be fun. For you, maybe?" Troy shot back, glaring at him. The volunteer clapped her hands. "We've provided blindfolds and music. You'll be judged on chemistry, coordination, and how well you sell the love between you and your partner. Now grab your blindfolds and get started." The couples spread out across the field, each of them grabbing a blindfold from a nearby table. Troy grabbed the soft piece of fabric, glaring at it like it had personally offended him. "I'm leading," he declared, shoving the blindfold toward Sivan. Sivan snorted. "Why? Scared you'll trip over your own feet?" "Yes." Troy said bluntly. Also, you're way too into this whole pretend boyfriend thing, so let's see how well you handle being blind for once. Fine. Sivan tied the blindfold around his head, covering his eyes. But if I step on your toes, it's on you. Troy took a deep breath as the music started. A slow, sensual tune that contributed in making this experience as uncomfortable as possible. He placed his hands on Sivan's shoulders, hesitating for a moment before moving closer. Okay, just follow my lead. Sivan's hands came up to rest on Troy's waist, his grip firm but careful. I trust you, he said, his voice lower than usual. Troy tried to ignore the flutter in his chest as they began to sway to the music. At first, it was a mess. Sivan would stumble a little and Troy would overcorrect, nearly sending them both off balance. You're terrible at this, Sivan teased. Shut up and just follow me, Troy muttered, tightening his grip on Sivan's shoulders. Gradually they found a rhythm. Sivan's body moved in sync with Troy's, and their movements became smoother with each step. Not bad, Sivan murmured, leaning down, his face so close it made Troy's breath hitch. You're supposed to be blind. Stop flirting. I don't need to see to know you're blushing, Sivan said, smirking. Troy's fingers tightened on Sivan's shoulders to keep himself steady as the speed of the music increased. You're really good at this, Troy admitted hesitantly, his voice quieter now. See, told you we make a good team, Sivan replied, tilting his head slightly. Troy couldn't respond. His focus was entirely on the feeling of Sivan's hands sliding just a little lower on his waist, his thumbs grazing the edge of his hips. Sivan, Troy warned, though it didn't come out as firm as he intended. I'm just getting into character, Sivan said innocently, though his grip tightened slightly, pulling Troy closer. The music ended abruptly, and the volunteer's cheerful voice snapped them back to reality. Great work, couples. That's what we call connection. Judges tally up those scores. Troy pulled back quickly, his heart pounding as Sivan took off his blindfold. You're impossible, he muttered, avoiding Sivan's gaze as they walked off the dance floor. Sivan chuckled at how flustered he was, just as Troy and Sivan were about to leave the field. The volunteer's voice rang out again. Wait, couples, don't go just yet, she called, her grin even wider than before. Troy froze mid-step, a sinking feeling in his stomach. He turned to Sivan, who looked way too amused by this sudden announcement. Why do I feel like this is going to be worse than the dancing? Troy muttered. Because it probably is, Sivan replied, smirking. The volunteer clapped her hands, thrilled by the groans and murmurs from the remaining couples. We've got a special surprise challenge for you. Think of it as a bonus round to really show off your chemistry. Troy groaned. No, absolutely not. You don't even know what it is yet, Sivan said, nudging him. Relax, babe. The word babe sent a jolt through Troy, but he ignored it, focusing on the volunteer as she continued. This challenge is called the kissing booth, she announced. Each couple will stand in front of the judges and perform a kiss that conveys love, passion, and connection. You'll be scored on believability and how well you sell your relationship. Troy's heart dropped into his stomach. Nope, not doing it. Sivan's eyes widened slightly, surprised, but his smirk quickly returned. Oh, this just keeps getting better. This is insane, Troy said, glaring at him. I am not kissing you in front of everyone. Why not? Sivan asked, raising an eyebrow. It's just for the competition. You don't want to lose, do you? Couples, line up, the volunteer called, gesturing to a makeshift stage where the judges were seated. Troy froze, his mind racing. There was no way he could do this. No way he could fake a kiss with Sivan and make it look real. But then he glanced at the other couples, some already walking toward the stage with confidence. If they backed out now, they'd lose points or worse, look suspicious. Sivan leaned closer, his voice low enough that only Troy could hear. Look, we've come this far. One kiss won't kill you. Troy shot him a glare. It might. Sivan grinned. Relax. I'll take the lead. That's what I'm afraid of. Troy muttered, but he reluctantly followed Sivan to the stage. The couples ahead of them went quickly, each of them performing a kiss that ranged from awkward pecks to overly dramatic makeouts. Troy felt his nerves spike with every passing second. When it was their turn, Sivan took his hand, pulling him to the center of the stage. Ready? Sivan asked, his voice softer now, almost reassuring. Troy swallowed hard, nodding despite the panic clawing at his chest. Just get it over with. The judges nodded for them to begin and Sivan turned to face Troy fully, his expression unreadable. Trust me, Sivan whispered, his hands coming up to gently cup Troy's face. Troy barely had time to register the words before Sivan leaned in, his lips brushing against Troy's in a kiss that was surprisingly soft. Troy's first instinct was to pull back, but then he realized how careful Sivan was being. He was not rushing, not teasing, he was just kissing him. It felt more real than he'd thought, and for a moment, Troy forgot about the judges, the competition, everything. Sivan pulled back slightly, their faces still close, and whispered, "You're supposed to kiss me back." Troy's cheeks burned, but he didn't argue. Slowly he leaned in, pressing his lips to Sivan's again. This time, it was somehow even more intense. Sivan's hand stayed on his face, his thumbs brushing Troy's skin, and it was as if he was trying to make the moment last. When they finally broke apart, the crowd erupted into cheers and applause, but Troy barely noticed. His heart was racing and he could still feel Sivan's lips on his. The volunteer practically squealed. Amazing. Now that is chemistry. Sivan turned to the judges with a confident grin, his arm slipping around Troy's waist. Told you we were the real deal. Troy tried to glare at him, but he was too flustered to manage more than a weak frown. As they left the stage, Sivan leaned in, his voice low and teasing. See, that wasn't so bad. Troy shoved him lightly. You're annoying. Sivan laughed, his arm still around Troy. And yet, you still kissed me. Troy didn't respond. He was too busy trying to figure out how to stop his heart from beating so fast, and why part of him wished the kiss hadn't ended so soon. The walk home was quiet, but the silence was anything but peaceful. Troy's mind raced, replaying the kiss over and over again, no matter how many times he tried to shove it to the back of his thoughts. Meanwhile, Sivan seemed completely unbothered, whistling casually as they reached their dorm room. As soon as the door shut behind them, Troy turned to face him. What the hell was that? Sivan raised an eyebrow, tossing his keys onto the counter. What was what? Don't play dumb. Troy crossed his arms. That kiss. Sivan just shrugged with a calm expression. What about it? It worked, didn't it? Everyone believed we're a couple. That's not the point. You didn't have to. Troy stopped, his cheeks burning as he searched for the right words. Didn't have to what? Sivan pushed off the doorframe he was leaning on and took a step closer, his expression shifting as the teasing glint in his eyes disappeared. Troy's breath caught as Sivan closed the distance between them, stopping just far enough to not invade his personal space. Didn't have to make it convincing. Sivan's voice was lower now, because that's what it was. Troy. Convincing. Troy's heart hammered in his chest. He took a step back instinctively, but his back hit the wall, trapping him. You. Sivan's hands came up, resting flat against the wall on either side of Troy's head. His body wasn't touching Troy's, but it was close enough that the tension between them felt electric. You keep acting like this is all some big deal, Sivan murmured, his eyes searching Troy's face. Like I'm not supposed to care if we win or not. But guess what? I do. And if that means kissing you, holding you, and doing whatever it takes to sell this. He paused, leaning closer. Troy's breath hitched as Sivan's lips brushed against his ear. Then I'll do it. And I'll make it good. A shiver ran down Troy's spine, and he cursed himself for how his body reacted. You're such a jerk, he muttered, his voice shaky. Sivan pulled back just enough to look at him, his lips twitching into a faint smirk. Maybe, but you didn't exactly hate it, did you? Troy glared at him, but the effect was ruined by how red his face had gotten. You're unbelievable, and you're cute when you're flustered, Sivan said, his voice dropping low again. Troy quickly shoved at Sivan's chest. Get off me. Sivan laughed, stepping back and holding his hands up in mock surrender. All right, don't get your panties in a twist. Troy glared at him, straightening his shirt and trying to regain some composure. I hate you. Sure you do, Sivan said, his smirk widening as he walked toward his room. As the door shut behind him, Troy let out a shaky breath, leaning back against the wall. He pressed a hand to his chest, trying to steady his racing heart. I really hate him, he whispered to himself, even though he didn't feel convinced. Friday's challenge announcement sent a chill down Troy's spine. The moment he and Sivan stepped into the field, the volunteer greeted them with her usual overly bright smile, holding a small box in her hands. Good morning, couples. Today's challenge is going to test just how well you know each other and how willing you are to take risks for love. Why does that sound terrifying? Troy muttered under his breath. Sivan, who looked far too relaxed for someone in this competition, grinned. Because it probably is. The volunteer opened the box, revealing folded papers. This challenge is called Truth or Dare, Couples Edition. Each pair will take turns drawing a slip from the box and performing either a truth or a dare related to their relationship. The catch? You can't skip your turn, or you lose points. The couples lined up, and one by one, they stepped forward to draw from the box. Some of the truths and dares were mild. A pair had to share their most embarrassing moment together. Another had to hold hands and skip around the quad. But as they got closer to the front, the challenges became bolder. Couple 5, the volunteer called, motioning to them. Troy sighed. Here goes nothing. He reached into the box, his fingers brushing against the folded papers before pulling one out. He unfolded it, his eyes widening as he read the dare. What does it say? Sivan asked, leaning over to peek. Pretend to propose in front of everyone. Sivan laughed. Oh, this is going to be good. It's not funny. Troy hissed, his face already heating up. It's hilarious, Sivan said, grabbing Troy's hand and pulling him toward the center of the field. All right, let's do this. Before Troy could protest, Sivan dropped to one knee, still holding Troy's hand. Oh my God, stop. Troy whispered, his voice panicked, but Sivan wasn't stopping. He was staring up at Troy with a ridiculously earnest expression. Troy, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. These past few months we've been together have been the most magical of my life. You've made me believe in love again. The crowd erupted into cheers and laughter, some of them even clapping. Troy covered his face with his free hand. You're the worst, he muttered, his voice muffled. Sivan grinned, tightening his grip on Troy's hand. So what do you say? Will you make me the happiest guy alive and pretend to be my fake fiancé for the rest of this competition? Troy peeked at him through his fingers, his face burning. You're annoying. I'll take that as a yes, Sivan said, standing up and pulling Troy into an exaggerated hug. The crowd went wild and the volunteer marked something on her clipboard. Excellent work, couple 5. Troy wanted to melt into the ground, but Sivan was still holding him, laughing softly against his ear. Round 2. After surviving the proposal, it was Sivan's turn to pick a slip from the box. He smirked as he read it, handing the paper to Troy without a word. Troy scanned it quickly, his stomach sinking. You've got to be kidding me. The slip read, share the most romantic moment you've had with your partner and recreate it. Romantic moment? Troy hissed. We don't even have real moments. Sivan shrugged. Guess we'll have to make one up. Great, Troy muttered, following Sivan back to the center of the field. Sivan turned to face him, his expression suddenly serious. All right, here's the plan. We'll say it was during a late-night movie marathon. You fell asleep on my shoulder and I kissed your forehead. Simple, sweet and believable. Troy blinked. That's weirdly specific. Sivan smirked. I'm a natural at this. Sivan gently placed a hand on his shoulder, leaning in. Let's sell it, Troy, he whispered, his voice softer now. Troy nodded. Fine. Sivan tilted his head, brushing his lips against Troy's forehead in a feather-light kiss. There, Sivan murmured, his hand lingering on Troy's shoulder. Believable enough for you. Troy hated how much he liked the warmth of Sivan's hand, and the softness of his voice. Yeah, he stammered, stepping back quickly. The crowd cheered again and the volunteer marked their scores with an approving nod. After the day's challenges, Troy had one goal, to avoid Sivan at all costs, until he could calm his mind from racing. Unfortunately, their shared dorm room didn't offer many places to hide. It's fine. It's just a stupid competition. He's just being Sivan. Yeah, it means nothing. He heard the shower turn on in the bathroom, and relief flooded him. Perfect. He's in the shower. I can relax for a bit. Troy flopped onto his bed, scrolling aimlessly on his phone to distract himself. After a while, his bladder reminded him he'd been holding his peace since the second challenge. He groaned, rolling off the bed and trudging toward the bathroom door. Sivan, he called, knocking lightly. Hurry up in there. Some of us have basic human needs. There was no response except the sound of running water. Troy frowned. Sivan, still nothing. With an irritated sigh, he jiggled the handle. It was unlocked. Seriously, who doesn't lock the door? He muttered, pushing it open. The sight that greeted him stopped him dead in his tracks. Sivan stood in front of the mirror, shirtless, with a towel wrapped low on his hips. He was shaving, his face half covered in shaving cream. Troy froze. Sivan turned to look at him, razor in hand. Oh hey, he said casually, as if he wasn't standing there half naked. Need something? Troy blinked rapidly, his eyes darting anywhere but at Sivan. I need to use the bathroom. Cool. Go ahead, Sivan said, returning to his shaving like it was no big deal. Troy glared at him. What do you mean go ahead? You're standing right there. Sivan glanced at him through the mirror, a teasing grin on his face. Relax, Troy. It's not like I've never seen you pee before. Remember that party last semester? Troy turned red. That was different. I was drunk. And now you're sober, Sivan said, rinsing his razor under the tap. So what's the big deal? Troy sputtered, gesturing wildly. The big deal is you're practically naked, and I can't. Sivan turned to face him fully, leaning casually against the sink. You can't what? He asked, his grin widening. Troy's eyes darted to the floor, the walls, the ceiling. Just anywhere but Sivan stupidly toned ABS. I can't deal with you, he finally shouted, turning around and marching out of the bathroom. Sivan's laugh followed him. Suit yourself, babe. Troy slammed the door to his room, collapsing onto his bed with a groan. His face was burning and he could still see Sivan's smug grin in his mind. What is wrong with him? He muttered into his pillow. The next morning, Troy woke up feeling more stressed than ever. The announcer greeted the couples with a mischievous grin. Welcome to day 6. Today's challenge is a big one. We're calling it the blind trust test. One partner will be blindfolded and must rely entirely on their partner to guide them through a series of tasks. This includes tasting food, identifying objects, and most importantly, letting their partner catch them in a trust fall. Troy turned to Sivan, who was grinning like a kid on Christmas. No, absolutely not. I don't trust you. Come on, Troy. Where's your sense of adventure? Sivan teased, grabbing a blindfold from the table. My sense of adventure doesn't involve you letting me fall on my face. Troy shot back. Relax, Sivan said, tying the blindfold around Troy's eyes. I've got you. You'll be fine. Troy let out a long sigh as Sivan led him to the first station. The first task involved tasting foods and guessing what they were. That's chocolate, Troy said after the first bite. Wow, a genius, Sivan teased. What gave it away? The chocolate taste. Troy groaned. Shut up and give me the next one. The next bite was salty and crunchy. Pretzel? Wrong. It's a chip, Sivan said, snickering. They taste the same, Troy argued. The rest of the tasks went similarly. And finally they reached the trust fall station. Troy stood stiffly, his arms crossed. I'm not doing this. Yes you are, Sivan said, positioning himself behind Troy. What if you drop me? Troy asked, his voice laced with suspicion. I won't drop you, Sivan said, his tone unusually sincere. Trust me, Troy. Troy hesitated, then took a deep breath. Fine, but if you drop me, I'm suing you. Noted, Sivan replied. Troy crossed his arms over his chest and leaned back slowly, his stomach twisting in fear. Sivan caught him easily, his hands firm and steady on Troy's back. See, told you I've got you. Troy let out a shaky laugh, pulling off the blindfold. He met Sivan's eyes and something unspoken passed between them. Thanks, Troy said quietly. Sivan smiled, his hands lingering just a moment longer before he let go. Anytime. At their dorm, after a quick shower and some takeout, Troy finally allowed himself to unwind. Sivan had retreated to his bed and Troy, wanting some quiet time, grabbed his book and settled into the couch in the sitting room. He flipped through the pages, trying to focus on the words, but his mind kept drifting back to Sivan's hand steadying him during the trust fall and the strange warmth he'd felt in that moment. Shaking his head, Troy buried himself in the story. Hours passed, and before Troy knew it, his eyelids began to droop. He drifted off, the book slipping from his hands. When Troy woke up the next morning he groaned, squinting his eyes at the light streaming through the curtains. The bed he slept on was soft and the pillow smelled familiar. Wait, bed? Troy shot upright, his heart pounding. This wasn't his bed. His eyes darted around, taking in the slightly messy nightstand, the guitar in the corner, and the unmistakable hoodie slung over the chair. Oh no, 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 Troy whispered, running a hand through his hair. Before he could scramble out, the door swung open, and Sivan appeared, towel around his neck, hair damp from the shower. Well, Sivan drawled, a slow grin spreading across his face, leaning against the doorframe. Look who made himself comfortable. Troy's face turned beet red. This isn't, he stammered, searching for an explanation. I must have fallen asleep while reading, and wandered into my bed. Sivan finished for him, raising an eyebrow. Wow, Troy, if you missed me, you could have just said so. I didn't miss you. Troy snapped, scrambling out of the bed. I was half asleep, I didn't know where I was going. Sure, Sivan said, his grin widening. Totally makes sense to sleepwalk into your roommate's bed. Happens all the time. Troy groaned, rubbing his temples. You're impossible, and you're adorable when you're flustered, Sivan said, moving to grab a shirt from his dresser. Troy glared at him. Stop saying that. Why, it's true, Sivan replied, pulling the shirt over his head. He turned back to Troy, his eyes twinkling with mischief. You know, you could stay. I won't mind. Troy stammered. Stayed? What, why no? That's not. Sivan laughed, walking past him, ruffling his hair on the way out. Relax, Troy. I'm just messing with you. Troy stood there for a moment, his heart racing. I hate him, he muttered to himself, but the heat rising to his cheeks betrayed him. From the kitchen, Sivan called out, Love you to, babe. Troy groaned, burying his face in his hands. Why is this my life? The competition site buzzed with energy. The remaining couples walked about, exchanging nervous glances as they waited for the announcement of the final challenge. You look tense, Sivan said, leaning closer. I'm fine, Troy replied, crossing his arms. You sure? Because your face is doing that cute scrunched up thing again, Sivan teased, poking Troy's cheek. Troy swatted his hand away. Focus, Sivan. It's the last challenge. We need to win this. Relax. We've got this in the bag, Sivan said, smirking. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. Welcome to the final day of the campus couples competition. Today's challenge is all about connection. To prove you're the most in-sync couple on campus, you'll participate in a guided intimacy session. This will include answering deeply personal questions about each other, holding prolonged eye contact, and completing a series of touch-based tasks to show your chemistry. The first task was simple. They just had to answer questions about each other. What's Troy's biggest fear? The host asked. Sivan didn't hesitate. Failure. Troy blinked, surprised by the accuracy of the answer. How did you know that? Sivan shrugged. I pay attention, Troy. Troy felt a strange warmth in his chest but quickly brushed it off. The next task was holding eye contact for a full minute. It sounded easy, but the longer they stared at each other, the harder it became to ignore the unspoken tension between them. Stop looking at me like that, Troy mumbled halfway through. Like what? Sivan asked, his voice soft. Like you're trying to read my mind or something, Troy said, his cheeks heating. Sivan smiled faintly, his gaze unwavering. Maybe I am. Troy's breath hitched and he was saved only by the timer going off. The final task, however, was the most nerve-wracking. For the last part of the challenge, one partner will be blindfolded, while the other guides them through a series of physical prompts. Remember, it's all about trust and connection. Troy groaned. Why is there always a blindfold? You'll get used to it, Sivan teased, tying the fabric over Troy's eyes. The first prompt was simple. Hold hands and guide each other through a short obstacle course. Sivan's grip on Troy's hand was firm and steady, and despite his initial nerves, Troy found himself relaxing. See, I've got you, Sivan said, his voice reassuring. The next prompt was far too intimate. Sivan had to guide Troy's hands to his face, shoulders, and chest, and Troy had to identify what he was touching. Troy hesitated when his hands landed on Sivan's chest. This is, his fingers rubbing against it, trying to figure out what it was. Take your time, Sivan murmured, amused. It's your chest, Troy said quickly, yanking his hands back as his face burned. Sivan laughed softly, but there was a gentleness to it. You're doing great, Troy. The final task was the most daring yet. They had to mimic a romantic pose provided by the host. The chosen pose, one partner pinning the other on the ground. Troy's heart raced as Sivan stepped closer. You okay with this? Sivan asked, his voice unusually serious. Troy nodded, though his throat felt dry. Yeah, let's just get it over with. Sivan gently guided Troy downward until his back hit the ground, pressing against him and pinning him down. Their bodies were too close, and Troy could feel Sivan's warmth, his breath brushing against his cheek. Relax, Sivan said softly, his hands resting on either side of Troy's head. This is so stupid, Troy muttered, his voice shaky. Maybe, Sivan replied, his eyes searching Troy's face, but we're killing it. The host called time, and Sivan reluctantly pulled away, both of them feeling the weight of something unspoken lingering between them. The results. The scores were tallied, and the announcer returned to the stage with an envelope. And the winners of the campus couples competition are Troy and Sivan. The crowd erupted into cheers as Troy stood frozen in disbelief. Sivan, however, threw an arm around him, grinning triumphantly. We did it, Sivan exclaimed. Yeah, we did, Troy said, still processing. As the crowd celebrated their victory, Troy couldn't help but smile. Maybe this competition hadn't been such a disaster after all. Later that night, after the buzz of the competition had died down and the prizes had been handed out, Troy and Sivan found themselves back in their dorm. The trophy sat proudly on the kitchen counter. Troy flopped onto the couch, letting out a long sigh. I still can't believe we won. Sivan leaned against the kitchen counter, watching him with a small smile. I can. We make a good team. Yeah, well, I guess pretending to be a couple has its perks, Troy replied, a teasing edge to his voice. Sivan pushed off the counter and walked over, sitting down beside Troy, pretending, huh? Troy blinked, suddenly feeling very aware of how close Sivan was. What are you getting at? Sivan shrugged. I mean, I wasn't really pretending, Troy. Troy's heart skipped a beat. He turned to look at Sivan, searching his face for any sign that this was another one of his jokes. But Sivan's expression was serious. His usual smirk softened into something shy. You weren't? Troy asked quietly. Sivan shook his head. Nope. Somewhere between you bossing me around and me realizing I'd actually miss you if you weren't around. I kinda figured out I like you. Really like you. Troy stared at him, his mind racing. But you're straight. Sivan finished for him, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, I thought so too. Turns out, not so much. Troy let out a breathy laugh, his face heating. You're such an idiot. Maybe, Sivan said, grinning. But I'm your idiot now. That is if you want me to be. Troy couldn't help but smile, his heart swelling at the vulnerability in Sivan's voice. Yeah, he said softly. I do. Sivan's grin widened, and before Troy could say anything else, Sivan reached over and pulled him into a tight hug. It was warm and for the first time in weeks, Troy felt like everything had fallen into place. You know, Troy said after a moment, his voice muffled against Sivan's shoulder. You're still annoying. Sivan chuckled, his chest rumbling against Troy. Yeah, but you love it. Sivan leaned closer, his voice low. Oh, and by the way, I moved you to my bed last night. You looked too uncomfortable on the couch. The end.